Guys, this is my final presentation for AB 641. My name is Kelsey Lilly, and I will be presenting on teaching adults with disabilities recreational skills. So some of the basic sections that I'll be covering, just like our papers that are due, research question, background, participant setting, materials, design, procedure, and then the design considerations. So for the first assignment that we did that kind of fleshed out these topics, my topic was I am studying teaching recreational skills to adults with developmental disabilities because I want to know how it impacts problem behavior in order to help my reader understand how it might help those individuals to be more independent and lead more fulfilling lives. And some of the feedback that I got was that it is a whole bunch of different ideas kind of combined into one, and that it needed a little bit more refinement for a thesis project. So that was my goal with this new question, which is how does learning a recreational skill and discriminating appropriate times to use it impact social behavior? So I kind of took that broad umbrella of independence and kind of narrowed it down to just how does it learning a new skill and discriminating when it is appropriate to use it impact the social behavior of those with disabilities. Like I said, originally it was meant to be ability to be independent, but with everything, it was kind of hard to define what independent meant and how to measure that. So I narrowed it down to just social behavior. I'd love to hear some feedback if you guys think there's anything else to consider within that. Some of the objectives that I plan on targeting with this research is successfully teaching adults with disabilities leisure skill activities that they can engage in independently. And then another objective is to determine the generalization of these skills to the natural environments. And that's where this independence piece kind of comes in, is that using this skill in more natural environments when given the opportunity to engage in behaviors that are socially appropriate when they have free time, kind of leads to a more independent lifestyle and the ability to spend time productively and influences other behaviors that influence independence, like social interactions, making friends, those kinds of things. And then another objective is ideally to determine generalization across time. So with behavior like this, I don't want to study just teaching them this skill and then only having them use it for the amount of time that I'm implementing these procedures, and then them not be able to use it weeks down the line, months down the line. I want this to be a skill that they can continue to use throughout their lives, hopefully, to spend their time productively and make new friends. So why is this topic important and why did I choose it? First, adults are an underserved population in ABA. Like a lot of us know, a lot of those who practice ABA focus on kids with autism, which is great, but there is a bunch of adults that could also use a lot of services, and I would love to explore those kinds of options. There's also limited research so far that I have found about implementing these kinds of procedures for adults with disabilities, including generalization and how it impacts not only their skills and acquisition, but how it impacts other areas of their lives, like their independence and like their ability to increase their social interactions. Another reason is that with the increase in the number of people that are diagnosed with autism each year, a lot of adults, in addition to those with autism and other disabilities, age out of school each year. Some of the research that I looked at from the U.S. Department of Education estimated that about 400,000 students age out of high school each year, which puts them in potentially less structured environments, such as they might be going home, they could be going to a day service program, and some of them may not have this quite the structure that school has, and they might not know what to do with this free time. And that's something that I want to explore and make sure that they continue to progress and continue to gain new skills. Which kind of leads into the next point, which is that this topic is socially valid. It has a lot of impact on those who are involved in it and their families, those caregivers, and just like other adults, those with disabilities can benefit from having socially valid and productive ways to spend their free time, which is part of the positive impacts of this. There are many positive impacts to learning productive skills, such as you can increase your social skills, which can lead to increased independence, more friends, a more fulfilling lifestyle. By learning a new skill, many adults can also access additional sources of reinforcement, which kind of also adds to their independence and overall improved quality of life. So some of the research about this topic, there's a lot of research regarding transition of students with disabilities post-high school, which is kind of what I mentioned, is that a lot of the research focuses on the results and the continued progression of those with disabilities compared to in high school and out of high school. They look at a lot of their skills, a lot of social interactions, financial stability, those kinds of things. There's a lot of research regarding that. The previous research on recreational skills, so far from what I've seen, mostly focuses on skill acquisition and generalization. A lot of it also focuses on kids, so I haven't found a whole bunch on adults, but some of the things that I have found, like I said, mainly focus on skill acquisition and generalization. One of the studies that I found taught adults with disabilities how to take and print their own photographs. Another one was on teaching those with disabilities a socially appropriate darts game. And then another one was teaching those with disabilities dancing skills in a community setting. So a lot of them mainly focused on acquiring the skill and then using the skill in more natural settings, but didn't really focus on any other aspect of how it impacted their lives, if it had an impact, and that's something that I think is really interesting and could really contribute. So for participants, ideally, I would recruit 3 to 4 individuals. To do this, multiple day service facilities for adults with disabilities would be reached out to determine if there are any individuals that are interested in participating. They should be post-high school aged, and those with disabilities can stay into high school up to 21 years old. So the requirement would be 21 plus years old to participate in the study. There would be some general skills needed too for those who want to participate. The ability to understand receptive instructions, communication skills, and then gross and fine motor skills would also be ideal. The activity that is being taught will likely depend on the kind of participant that are willing to participate in the project. But previously, I thought about basing activities off of each individual, but after thinking about it and really trying to look at the other impacts that the skill may have, it would be possibly easier to look at one skill and how it affects multiple individuals across has the same effects on them. And then, similar to other research, screening prior to acceptance and participation in research would be required just to make sure that they fit all these requirements and have all the necessary skills that would allow them to participate. So the setting, skill acquisition will likely take place in a clinical setting. Depending on the participants that are recruited, setting would ideally be across be the same across participants. If it's possible, I would like to recruit participants from the same facility, hopefully, so that which would facilitate some possible group activities, which would also help with the social interactions part and kind of help with some threats to internal validity with variation across settings. And then for the generalization, probes and phases, they would be conducted likely across different settings in the same facility, just because of feasibility and ability to have the participants all in the same area, in the same setting. So depending on the participants that are recruited, if it is not possible to have them all within the same facility, I would be open to the idea of implementing the generalization and intervention in a more natural setting, such as their homes or friends' houses or relatives' houses. But like I said, if all could be recruited from the same facility, we could then implement intervention and generalization within the same facility and make it a little bit more feasible to complete. So for the intervention sessions, the skill acquisition portion, session durations would likely last 20 to 30 minutes depending on the skill that is selected. Skills will likely initially be taught one-to-one depending on the participant's skill level initially, and then depending on the skill and activity that is selected, group sessions may eventually be used to facilitate a more natural environment when playing a game or a board game or card game or something like that. The research will be conducted by the primary researcher, which is me, and then possibly depending again on where the participants are recruited from, I would like to train facility staff to possibly implement some procedures and help gather data to see the effects on different areas and different settings. And then for the generalization sessions, will likely be of similar duration and in individual or group settings. Again, depending on the activity that is selected for the individuals, generalization sessions could be a little bit longer to accommodate things like a board game playing with multiple people to complete the entire game. So some of the materials, the activity materials will be created or purchased depending on the skill that's chosen. And then some considerations when choosing the activity, like I mentioned before, it will likely be based on some of the participants. So when I would be deciding what kind of activity to implement, some things I think about would be age appropriateness, the social validity of the skill, the participant and key stakeholder buying into the activity. I just want to make sure that it's not aversive or is seen as an unimportant skill. And then some possible ideas. Like I said, it would all depend, but possible ideas could be board games like Sorry, Life, and Monopoly, or card games. Some other materials that would be needed. So depending on the task that is selected, a task analysis would then be developed for each step of the activity. And then again, depending on the level of the participants, I've also thought about the idea of the task analysis being provided to them as a reference, either the full task analysis or steps broken down into steps to serve as a visual prompt. The thing with that is that eventually it would have to be faded out, but something to consider depending on the level of the participants. And then in addition to the task analysis, Data sheets would be required to record correct and incorrect responses as well as occurrences of social interactions. And then to teach the use of the skill during appropriate times, discrimination training, I've been thinking about implementing as well. This is something that I've struggled with a little bit with this project, is determining how to quite do that. I've tried to look into some of the research, and there's not a lot that I've found so far about how to implement discrimination training, to teach individuals appropriate times when and when not to engage in a certain activity. So feedback on that idea is very much welcome. So as for the design of my project, I would likely be using a multiple baseline design across participants. The independent variable would be the implementation of the task analysis to teach skills involved in the activity selected, and then the dependent variable, looking at how the independent variable affects it, is the number of correct responses within the task analysis, as well as occurrences of engagement in the target activity when given the opportunity, and then how the occurrences of social interactions increase or decrease, or generally the effect that learning a skill like this has on the social interactions. One of the studies that I mentioned earlier as part of the previous research also used a changing criterion design, which I did consider for implementing depending on the participants, and then using it as a method of progressing through the steps of the task analysis, which is how this study used it in theirs. After doing a little bit more research on the changing criterion design and the research articles that we read for class, the way that it was used in this original study, it was used as more as a shaping procedure, and changing criterion design should be used if the skills are already in the participant's repertoire. So depending on the skill that is chosen to teach these participants, a changing criterion design could be implemented if the skill is already in their repertoire. The phases of my design, there will be baseline. The baseline will just be based on the participant's ability to engage in the skill, given the opportunity to do so, and then the number of correct steps performed without any additional prompting or any additional help in baseline, and then the baseline number of social interactions. For intervention would consist of implementing the task analysis and the discrimination training, and then generalization would consist of data collection, and then on the natural opportunities to engage in the skill, as well as occurrences of social interactions as well. So some of the design considerations that went into deciding how best to conduct this research, the data type would be occurrences, and then the task analysis steps would be converted into a percentage of correct responding. I did consider the idea of a duration for correct engagement in the activity, given a natural opportunity for generalization. But since that would not be used in the intervention phases, I'm not sure if that would really make sense to implement a different kind of data collection for generalization. And then there were also a few design considerations that went into data collection. Another thing to consider is that IOA data will be collected by an independent observer on correct responses and social interactions, as well as intervention and generalization. So as for the procedure, baseline would consist of the activity being presented, whatever it may be, and then data will be collected on independent engagement and correct responding for each step of the task analysis. And then data will also be collected on the number of social interactions with peers. Intervention, the procedure would consist of implementing the task analysis steps based off of where the participants fell in baseline. Mastery criterion for moving on to the next step of the task analysis would be 100% responding within that step across 3 different sessions. And then, as well as implementing the intervention, discrimination training would also be used to teach the appropriate times to engage in the activity, such as possibly teaching engagement when given a particular instruction. I know that there are also other ways to implement discrimination trainings, like a green card or a red card. But like I said, this is something that I kind of struggled with determining how best to do. So feedback on that would be great. And then as for the generalization procedure, data will be collected on the independent engagement in activity at appropriate times, as well as the number of occurrences of social interactions will also be recorded. So there were other design considerations that went into deciding how best to propose this research. One of the things that I really thought about was what kind of research design to use, and eventually decided on the multiple baseline because it's useful for behaviors that can be unlearned, such as skill acquisition, which is what this is. It would be hard to reverse or withdraw conditions and expect baseline level responding after learning other steps of the task analysis. And then with the use of the multiple baseline design, there's also control for generalization effects. And like I mentioned before too, some of the previous research that I found also focuses on using a changing criterion design. But some of the research that we read for class 2 kind of made sure to discriminate using a changing criterion as a shaping procedure or using it to teach new skills. And in the previous research, it was used as more of a shaping procedure and using it as a shaping procedure to teach new skills, which is not the intention of a changing criterion design. It is meant to accelerate or decelerate existing skills in the repertoire. So, like I mentioned, that could possibly be implemented into my multiple baseline design depending on the skill that is chosen for the individuals. But that would have to depend on those individuals and the skills as well. So other possible designs that were considered was the alternating treatment design. But for a study such as this, the treatment methods, there's only one method of treatment. So there's nothing to compare to, which wouldn't make much sense to use alternating treatment. A withdrawal design was considered, but it would be difficult to do with behaviors that can't be reversed, such as this skill acquisition. And then a reversal was considered as well, but there are no contingencies to be reversed in this proposal either. Some data collection concerns, in addition to the IOA that I mentioned before, if staff from the facility are going to be utilized in implementing the procedure, I would need to make sure that they are trained correctly and that they are able to accurately record the data. So something to consider if I were to use staff would be a training procedure and then ensuring that they are able to implement and accurately record the data to reflect participants' behavior. And then as for ethical concerns, as of right now, there are none evident at this time. And then here are my resources. I will also post my slides. And like I said, Any feedback would be greatly appreciated.